Yo, what up, fam? It's your boy, Big Walt, back with more Blockchain 411. Always keeping you up to date on all things crypto and all things blockchain. Today, we're going to be talking about blockchain, cryptocurrency, and the global economy. Today's story is an intersection of all three. Blockchain's hitting the big stage, baby. It's not just central banks and central bank digital currencies that have or that can be impacted by blockchain. Anyway, let's dig into it. Rock with me. So yeah, fam, El Salvador's in the news. They're making big waves. They're talking about adopting Bitcoin as a formally recognized currency for their government. Anyway, let's jump into it and see what it's about. Here's the headline. IMF repeats El Salvador Bitcoin warnings as country launches $150 million adoption fund. El Salvador approved a $150 million fund ahead of its Bitcoin project launch. Meanwhile, the IMF iterated its concerns about the initiative. Let's see what they're talking about. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, has repeated its warning about El Salvador's imminent embrace of Bitcoin as legal tender. Quote, privately issued crypto assets like Bitcoin come with substantial risk. Making them equivalent to a national currency is an inadvisable shortcut, the IMF tweeted yesterday while sharing a link to its original warning of July 26, 2021. In July, the IMF slammed El Salvador for its decision to adopt Bitcoin, suggesting the move, quote, raises a number of macroeconomic, financial, and legal issues, end quote. The international organization also said that crypto assets can pose significant risks and effective regulatory measures are very important when dealing with them. The IMF is not alone in its concerns. The World Bank was also sharply critical of President Kelly's decision earlier this summer, refusing to help the country implement its policy, citing environmental and transparency concerns. I'll speak to that in a second. Controversy notwithstanding, El Salvador will adopt Bitcoin as legal tender on September 7th. See that? And the country's Congress has prepared a $150 million fund to help the Bitcoin project get off the ground next week. El Salvador's $150 million Bitcoin fund. Yesterday, El Salvador's Congress approved a $150 million fund that will help facilitate transactions between US dollars and the flagship cryptocurrency. The purpose of this law is to financially support the alternatives that the state provides without prejudice to private initiatives that allow the user to carry out the automatic and instantaneous convertibility of Bitcoin to the United States dollar. A congressional document reportedly said, it sounds like a crypto exchange to me, a single purpose crypto exchange. Anyway, what's more, the fund will be reportedly redirected from the current budget for the finance ministry and administered by Bandisol, the country's state development bank. The fund was approved with 64 votes, while only 14 were cast in opposition. Now, before we get into the bulk of this, one thing that keeps rearing its head, you've heard this from the likes of Janet Yellen and some other people, that cryptocurrency is not environmentally friendly. That's a red herring if I ever heard one. In apples to apples comparison, you would have to compare the carbon footprint of Bitcoin or Ethereum or pick your blockchain. You'd have to do an apples to apples carbon footprint of that and the entire banking system, because that is what it is the equivalent of. Okay. So you would have to, every bank across the world, all the way down, from their big headquarters, their big skyscrapers, to all the private jets that the CEOs use, all the way down to every branch, right? And every teller and the electricity used by all of that. Like, that is what we would have to compare it to. Now, I haven't done that comparison, but there are some very diligent people who I believe have worked on that. I'll have to dig it up. But there's no way that Bitcoin is consuming, more electricity or having a larger, carbon footprint than all of that. Again, a red herring, and it's to throw people off, take your eyes off the prize. Anyway, just wanted to point that out, that I typically raise an eyebrow when I hear people, demonizing or casting a shadow or aspersions on crypto and blockchain, based on, proof of work, not to mention that most things are moving to proof of stake anyway. I need you to do me a favor, fam. Please click that subscribe button and the like button. It might be a small thing to you, but to us it's huge. We're trying to hit this 1,000 subscriber milestone one subscriber at a time. So YouTube will recognize us and give us access to the tools that will allow us to bring you more and even better content. Thank you for your support, fam. We really appreciate you. Anyhow, I find it interesting though, that the IMF is not supporting this. I didn't expect the IMF or the World Bank to support this. The existing world order is not excited about any cryptocurrency, any open, decentralized cryptocurrency having any kind of inroads into what has been the domain of central banks in issuing and managing fiat currency. The IMF, if I understand correctly, does its job by managing the world economy, by working with the central banks on policy and having them make moves to control the ebb and flow of inflation. They can't control anything when it comes to Bitcoin, because there are no controls. The whole point of it was to be censorship resistant, and to have a limited, supply, so that there could be no debasement, of the currency. The other thing I found interesting is if you look at the fact that, the fund that El Salvador approved was $150 million, and then, take a look at this headline right here, where in April of 2020, the IMF approved a $389 million disbursement to El Salvador under the guise of COVID pandemic support, not relief, but support. And this $150 million fund for Bitcoin, was about half of that. So that's kind of an interesting, coincidence. Maybe it has nothing to do with it, but you never know. One of the things I'd like to point out here, that it says that the first disbursement under an IMF lending arrangement to El Salvador in over 3 decades. So, the IMF and World Bank, they really haven't been rocking with, El Salvador for about 30 years. And, now they're giving them some loot, again, under the guise of COVID support. So that's interesting. And I wonder if that has anything to do with how much weight they're, giving, they being El Salvador, how much weight El Salvador's leadership is giving to these warnings, from the IMF. Another thing that I thought was interesting here is that this statement right here, where it says the IMF continues to closely monitor El Salvador's situation and stands ready to provide policy advice and further support as needed. Money always has strings attached. So when they cut those checks, they definitely want to have a voice, as to, what El Salvador is going to be doing from a fiscal policy perspective. So that's to be expected. But it's interesting that they're advising by tweet right now, and those tweets seem to go unheeded. The rest of this article is interesting. I'm not going to read it, but there was a quote from the managing director, of the IMF around, what his vision was, and why this rapid financing instrument was put to use, etc. But again, just interesting. Last couple points here, and this is just for context, right? Like, if you look at El Salvador's, debt to GDP ratio, it was never great, right? Like, it's floating, hovering around, 70 some odd % of GDP, their debt was. for the last, few years, then bam, 2020 comes and it jumps all the way up to 90%. And so, can we read anything into that? Or is that purely, based on COVID? And, are the 2021 numbers going to, fall back down? Is it going to look better or is it not? Is this what has the IMF, so shaky as it relates to that? And then, you're looking at, what the government budget, as a percent of GDP, 9.2%, negative 9.2%. So like that's an interesting, number in terms of, their government, does not have, a super big budget. So something also to keep in mind, just context, as it relates to, what the IMF, may or may not be thinking about. Looks like the GDP, the GDP dropped actually by about dropped by about $2 billion. So yeah, like their debt increased, up to, their debt to GDP ratio increased like up to 90%. And their GDP reduced by $2 billion. So they got hit, with a double whammy. On the one hand, their GDP decreased. On the other hand, their debt increased at the same time. So that helped them. So, hopefully their economy will bounce back a little bit. The last thing I'll say is, El Salvador's credit rating is negative. Moody's and everybody else is rating them as a negative risk. So again, these are all reasons why the IMF may be a little bit shaky about this move. This also may be reason for them to make this move. If their own currency isn't that stable, their own fiat currency, then perhaps by using Bitcoin, that's a quote gold standard that everybody can sort of like wrap their heads around, and their own citizens can be confident in at least some currency. So anyway, I just thought that was interesting. Anytime I hear about, a country adopting Bitcoin as legal tender, like that's big news. And, we want to talk about that. I doubt, it's not even a matter of doubt, that will never happen in the United States. And it won't happen in a lot of major economies. But it is interesting. Anyway, tell me what you guys think about it. I'll see you next time I pull up on the block. Until then, holla.